You're listening to Rock-N-Sexxy UnCensored, bringing you the cutting edge of the entertainment world weekly, hosted by Lynn.
Woohoo! All right, everybody, welcome back to another amazing episode of Rock-N-Sexxy UnCensored. We are coming to you live tonight on United Broadcasting Network, Channel 1 at ubngo.com. And we are live streaming on our blog weekly at rockandSexxyUncensored.com. I'm your host, Lynn, and it is my great pleasure to be here with you guys tonight. Joining me in the co-host seat is Joe Williamson.
Hey, Amber. Thank you so much for having me. You look absolutely stunning. Always an honor.
Oh, and thank you for coming back on the show, Joe. It's becoming a regular thing.
Hey, I'm keeping my fingers crossed.
I know, it's awesome. And we definitely appreciate your input and everything you do for the show. Just wanted to let you know that. So, guess what, folks? RNSU works overtime to bring you the cutting-edge talent of the music and entertainment industries, and tonight is no exception. Our special guest is a filmmaker and a bona fide scream queen. She came to prominence in Roger Corman's 1982 cult horror classic, The Slumber Party Massacre. Since then, she has appeared in over 200 films, right, Joe?
Yes. And she keeps pretty busy.
She keeps pretty busy. And Joe, you had so many of them in the car, I was going to let you jump in there with one or two of her films.
Yeah, Nightmare Sisters, and then Granny's House, and then she recently did It Wants Blood opposite Eric Roberts.
Oh, wow. I didn't even think of those. Well, some of her films, including 1990's Haunting Fear, which she considers her best work. We'll be viewing that tonight. And some of her more recent work can be seen in Eminence Hill and Personal Demons 2018, which she actually produced, directed, and starred in. She has appeared in several documentaries and was the executive editor of Weird Tales magazine, among some of her other career highlights. Please welcome to RNSU, Brink Stevens.
Yay!
Yay!
Thank you.
How you doing, Brink?
I'm excellent. Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Don't mind seeing yourself on the big screen behind you. I know it's distracting, but at least you know you look great, right?
I try.
We're so happy to have you in the house. We were talking about your work on the way here tonight and trying to decide, which ones we were going to talk about. And Joe kept saying, make sure you mention this one and make sure you mention that. You, after doing Roger Corman's film, you just went right out of the chute and you've never stopped since, have you?
No, that was my first feature film. In 1982, it came out. We shot it in 81, Slumber Party Massacre. And back then, we didn't have video. It was everything showed in theaters. So I'm sitting in the theater watching myself on the big screen, and I'm like, I'm not too bad at this. Maybe I'll just keep doing this until I can find a science job. And I never went back into science, so I stayed in horror movies.
Wow, that's interesting. So what actually got you into acting, and how did you pick horror instead of another genre?
I always say that my career chose me. I didn't choose it. I had been living in San Diego, and I was getting my doctorate degree in marine biology. So I ended up having a kind of a falling out with the school. I wanted to study dolphin communication, and they didn't want me to because San Diego was home of the tuna fishing industry, which was killing dolphins, and also Navy, which were strapping bombs to their back to blow up submarines. So nobody wanted to talk to dolphins because you'd have to feel really bad about slaughtering them. So they said, well, it'd be safer if you stuck with guppies. So I ended up leaving school with a master's degree. And then I married my college sweetheart, Dave Stevens, who's an artist. He did Rocketeer. And I moved to Los Angeles, and while I was looking for a science job, one day I walked by a casting office, and they're like, you, come here. And I'm like, no, I'm in the wrong place. And they're like, no, come here. And the guy says, you want to be in a movie tomorrow? And I'm like, yeah, okay. So-
And you had never studied acting?
No,
up until this
never. I
point.
never even thought about being an actress. So I was an extra in all the marbles. I got $40 for the day and lunch. And I thought, well, I'll just keep doing this until I can find a science job. And I never did. I kept expecting any day someone would come and say, you're not a real actress. Get out of here. But they never did. So I became an actress.
Did they hire you because you had a specific look that they wanted in the film, or that you were just a pretty girl? Because I know that back in those days, there would be a lot of guys who were kind of hanging out at the local drugstore being like, hey, babe, come here. You want to be in my movie tomorrow? And I would always be like, sure, right, Betty. So I'm glad that it worked out that it was real.
Yeah, well, in the 80s, I was in my early 20s, and there was a lot of teen comedies and youth movies at that time. So I would get hired a lot as an extra for classroom scenes and stuff. And I was in some big movies like not Slumber Party Massacre, but Spinal Tap, for example. I was hired as an extra in the crowd scenes at their concerts. And I worked 3 days, and then they said, hey, we're moving on to the penthouse at the Rock-N-Roll Hilton on Sunset. Come with us. And I actually had some speaking lines, and I'm in the movie Spinal Tap, so I'm all excited about that just because I was the right age for the audience for the rock and roll shows.
And that was great back then. I mean, you can still do it today, but they would call it when they bump you up. So you'd originally show up on a movie and you'd be in an extra or whatever role, and then all of a sudden the director would be like, you come here, pretty girl. I've got a spot for you. Can you speak? Can you do this or whatever?
Well, my champion on that was Michael McKean, who's in the movie as an actor. And he was like, did you say anything? And I'm like, no, I'm an extra. And he says, no, you got to say something. You'll make more money that way. So he was working with me. The whole movie was ad lib anyway, and each take was a completely different thing. So I finally got some lines. And then later I was listening to the commentary track, and I had not even begun to do horror movies when I did Spinal Tap. And on the commentary track, Michael McKean says, oh, that's Brink Stevens. She's a famous scream queen. So I realized that he had followed my career, that he knew what had happened to me. I thought that was just so cool of him.
Well, it's really funny because even now, but particularly back in the 80s when you were a scream queen, a horror or Star Trek, or there were certain particular genres where the intense following that you would get as a result of it was like astounding when you'd go to the conventions and stuff like that.
Yeah, it was, our target audience was college-age males. And I was fortunate, even though I was like 25, I looked like I was 18. So I played a lot of high school girls. And it was just really fun. You know, it was the early 80s were just such a lark. And horror movies were really horror comedies, the ones that I did. So it was all a lot of fun.
And then they called you the Betty Page of the 90s.
Yeah.
They were saying that.
Yeah, I had married Dave Stevens, and we had been dating in the 70s when I was in college. We belonged to a comic book club in college. And I started modeling for him, and then we got married. And even after we were divorced, we only were married for 2 years, I continued to model for him for 10 years. And so for the
Well, that's good that you guys could actually continue working together.
We just couldn't be married, but we were really good friends. You know, we disagreed on home decor. Really, seriously, he wanted
well, that's
everything.
a big deal. I'm a Virgo. I could see that, right?
Yeah, I'm a Virgo too.
Oh, you're a Virgo. Okay, so if you know Virgos, home decor would definitely be a deal breaker.
Yeah, but before we got married in 1980, he brought me up to Hanna-Barbera where he was working in Los Angeles, and they said, "Oh, Dave, you found your Betty Page," and I didn't know who she was, but Dave sort of almost single-handedly revived interest in Betty Page, who was a 50s pinup model and had bangs like I do. So
it's not just the bangs though. You have her eyes. You have the whole essence. Definitely.
Thank you. Yeah, I did a lot of modeling for him. For the first 10 years, almost everything he drew was me posing for it, even though it had different faces on it and stuff. But in fact, I'm going to San Diego Comic-Con this year, and they have a Dave Stevens panel, and I was interviewed for a documentary about him. So there's still a great deal of interest in his life and work. He died in 2008 from cancer.
Oh, sorry to hear that. So at least you keep his, all his work alive, and you can still talk about it. Wow, that's really great trivia.
He was much beloved, and I think that the panel at Comic-Con about his life is going to be very well attended.
Oh, absolutely. Do you miss 1980s culture? And how do you feel the industry and filmmaking has changed since the 80s?
I love the 80s, just everything about them. The music was spectacular.
Right.
And the big hair and the shoulder pads, and just everything was so much fun. When the first few movies
I'm like, I still got mine. I never left the 80s, so I don't have to miss it.
The first few films I did were all shot on film, and they showed in theaters. But it was in the 80s that the whole video boom happened. And I was in the right place at the right time, because all of a sudden I was doing 6 and 8 movies a year. They were turning them out like a factory. And I worked for Fred Olin Ray, Dave Dakota, Charlie Band, Roger Corman, Jim Wynorski, and everybody was turning out just tons of product for the video store shelves in the mid-'80s.
Yep, they sure were. I was in a different genre, but I know exactly what you're talking about. And there were a handful of talent that were popular and being used all the time, and we just worked all the time. Luckily, if you were chosen, one of the chosen group of talents. And I don't know if that was because they could count on us to show up and they knew how we would act and fit into roles, but I know that we definitely benefited a lot from that. I miss the 80s.
I do too. I'm considered one of 3 80s scream queens. The others are Linnea Quigley and Michelle Bauer. And after 40 years, we're still really close friends.
Oh, that's great.
We get together a lot. We used to go shopping in the 80s and hang out. And so it was really nice to be with a fun group of girls that had similar interests. We weren't competitive with each other. We all did movies together. Nightmare Sisters was so low budget that they pretty much turned the camera on and had it on a tripod and shot for like 12 minutes. And we did it all in one take because we all knew our lines. There was no, camera movement of any kind. These movies were not great works of art, but they were really fun.
Wow, that is amazing. Are they're both still working today as well?
Yeah, Michelle kind of retired for a while to raise a child who just left home and got married. So now she's thinking about kind of getting back into it. And we just came back from Texas. I was invited to do a comic book store tour because I had 6 issues of a comic book called Brink of Destruction in the 90s, and there's still a great deal of interest in it. So I did stores in the greater Houston area, and I didn't want to do it by myself, so I invited the girls to come with me. And we did good. It was very enthusiastic crowds. We had a wonderful time, and we all 3 just did the Hollywood show at the Burbank Marriott.
Oh, yeah, I've done the Hollywood show. Yay, there it is, right up there on the screen for anybody who's interested. Can they still get copies of these comic books, and where can your fans get them?
I sell them at conventions. I still have lots of them.
Do you have a website where they can go?
Yeah, brink.com, and I'm also on Facebook. But it was really fun to do a comic, and I've been reading comic books all my life. I started with Wonder Woman when I was young, and then I got into Vampirella and stuff like that. And I always wanted to do my own comic book. So Brian Pulido of Chaos Comics, who was doing Lady Death and Evil Ernie, said, well, let's do one. And so I co-wrote the first issue with him. It was called Brink of Eternity. And Brian's company made it for me. And it was very successful. So he said, I don't really want to continue this, but you should. So I ended up doing 5 more issues by myself. I wrote them, produced them. I hired the artists, but it was great. I finally had my own comic book, Brink of Destruction.
You just recently did a Comic-Con, didn't you?
Yes, the San Fernando Comic Book Valley Convention. Yeah.
And they have all of that.
Oh, yes, they have. Brinks was a guest at that show, I believe, a couple times.
Yep. I do as many shows as I can these days. It's really fun because you get to meet the fans in person. And I think that was why I became so successful in the 80s along with my fellow Scream Queens, because we would do these conventions, which were just becoming popular right as we were as actresses.
Yes.
And we go around the country And I would publish a newsletter. It was very easy for stalkers to know where I was going to be next. It was like, come see me in New Jersey.
But stalkers were in a good way back in the 80s. They didn't stalk you like they do now, where they troll and they do all this kind of...
No. They were terrified of me.
Oh, they were?
They would stand in line with a photo for me to sign, and they'd be trembling because they'd seen my movies.
Oh,
they knew what I was capable of. So, but it was great. You know, it was really fun to meet the fans in person, and we became even more of their darlings for that reason. Because in the 80s, a lot of popular horror movie characters had masks on, like Jason, Freddy,
yes,
Texas Chainsaw, and we didn't have masks. We were just beautiful girls. And so the fans would much rather look at us.
You're still a beautiful girl, Brink.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, absolutely. And we have a surprise for our viewers tonight. I want to go back to the film that you did called Haunting Fear. We have a little piece on it. We have the trailer that we want to share with our viewers tonight. Andrea, if you can go ahead and show that to us. And then we want to talk to you about why you say that is your best work.
Okay.
And what is it about the film?
All right.
Take a look at this, guys.
So how does it feel to be a murderer? Makes me feel alive. This is the greatest rush I've ever had.
Jan Michael Vincent. Karen Black.
I get lonely playing with myself. Can't you come over and play with me?
In Edgar Allan Poe's Haunting Fear. An erotically charged descent into madness.
Now for the unpleasantries.
She was overwhelmed by desire. He was driven by greed. But his wife was possessed with a haunting fear.
All right. Sorry about that, guys. We were actually showing you a silent movie.
I'm not that old.
No, we had a little technical difficulty with our sound. And we didn't even get to the part where we get to see you. And it's such I want you guys to see this. So let's go ahead and let our engineering department work on that for us for a minute. And I wanted to ask you, because I saw that it mentioned that this is your best work. You feel this is your best work out of all the films that you did, 200 of them. And you guys ready? Okay, great. Let's take a look.
So how does it feel to be a murderer? Makes me feel alive. This is the greatest rush I've ever had.
Jan Michael Vincent. Karen Black.
I get lonely playing with myself. Can't you come over and play with me?
In Edgar Allan Poe's Haunting Fear. An erotically charged descent into madness.
Now for the unpleasantries.
She was overwhelmed by desire. He was driven by greed. But his wife was possessed with a haunting fear. Victoria is a beautiful woman pushed to the brink of madness by her adulterous husband and her psychotic nightmares. She's about to find out that reality is much more horrifying than any nightmare could ever be. Haunting Fear. From the tortured spirit of Edgar Allan Poe comes this terrifying tale of sexual insanity and psychological sensuality. It's a story of passion, revenge, the supernatural, deception.
I'd almost say you're still warm.
Murder. Only the ingenious mind of Edgar Allan Poe could foretell the feverish eroticism of a body heat or the orgasmic terror of fatal attraction with Haunting Fear. Starring Jan Michael Vincent, Karen Black, with a special appearance by Mr. Haunting Fear himself, Michael Berryman.
Time for the autopsy.
Haunting Fear will explore your innermost terror.
There it is, folks. And by the way, just want to let our listeners know, if you want to call in and join the show, say hi to Brink, or have any comments about the trailer or add to our discussion, it's 323-524-2599. It's right there on our screen, and you're welcome to call in. So tell us about this film. This is your best work. I mean, you look beautiful, and it was, what, 1990?
It was made in 1991, and for 30 years, it never came out on DVD. So I would always say, people say, what's your favorite movie? And I say Haunting Fear, and nobody had ever seen it. And the reason was it was tied up in some sort of litigation. It came out on VHS, but until the rights reverted back to Fred Olen Ray 30 years later, he finally put it out last year on DVD. And it was limited to 1,000 copies. I signed all of them before they wrapped them in the plastic. And so it's really a collector's item, and I'm hoping everybody gets a chance to get one.
Do you still collect your VHS in the box, the big box? They called them the big boxes. And
Yeah.
I used to have a big collection of them myself.
I did. I replaced all my VHSs with DVDs, and now everything's streaming. It's very hard now to acquire DVDs because everything I do lately goes directly to streaming.
And it's funny because now DVDs are old, but when you come from the era of VHS, people are like, oh, VHS. It's like when I used to walk knee deep in the snow to school, right? And now we're doing it. Here we are all these years later.
What I liked about Haunting Fear was I had been working with Fred Olen Ray already. I did Mob Boss, Warlords, Spirits, a number of movies for him. And he handed me a script, and he said, read it and tell me what you think of the script. It's called Haunting Fear. So I read it, and I said, it's a good script. And he said, no, I know it's a good script. Do you want to play the role? And I said, the secretary? And he said, no, the lead role, Victoria. And I was taken aback because that was the biggest role I had ever played in my life so far. And he was putting a lot of faith in me to carry this movie. I'm pretty much in every single scene. And in many of my movies, I had died in the end. So this was like the first movie where I was still alive at the end of the movie. I was so excited.
But by this time, after 8 years, you had been acting, so you had already cut your acting chops, and you were off and running, right?
Yeah, I just had never really carried a movie as the star. I was part of an ensemble cast. But it was fun to work with John Michael Vincent and with Karen Black. They were both really quirky and interesting people, and I just had a great time doing it. It was one of my best experiences.
And you know what? You look exactly the same. You're still absolutely as beautiful as you were in that film. Don't you agree?
I agree 110%.
Oh, you guys are nice. Thank you. I always say it's not the years, it's the mileage.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, I've done...
Some people say that to me, but, well, you know.
IMDb says I've done 233 movies in 40 years. And most of them are not in Los Angeles, so it's so much travel. And I really see the inside of an airplane, the inside of a hotel, and whatever location they drag me to. But sometimes it's all night shooting, and then I'm back in the hotel and back in the airplane. So it's a kind of a tough life.
And it's not like long shoots. They usually shoot these projects within a couple of days or a couple of weeks at the most.
Yeah.
So you're just on the set, grueling schedule, sometimes 24-hour around the clock.
Yeah.
And then all your scenes are shot and you're out, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in the early 80s to 90s, I worked long days. I mean, I would sometimes work 6 days a week on a movie, like the Mommy movies in Iowa. And
the Mommy movies?
Yeah, Mommy 1 and Mommy 2. I played the sister Beth. But I worked at least a week on both of those. And now films have changed where the budgets are much lower than they used to be. And these were considered low-budget movies.
As if we could have imagined.
Yeah,
The inflation is higher.
Yeah.
The budgets are right? The
Right.
budgets are sinking. It's like, we've got to have a little talk here.
So now I only work a day or two on a movie, and they work the heck out of me. I mean, it's a long day. So, I don't work.
And they
as
don't
long,
do the
but-
12-hour turnaround because I think they're, right?
Not on the low budget stuff.
No, it's
No.
like you're lucky to be working.
Yes.
You can work all night, right? But one of the questions I had about horror films is, after acting in horror films, when you go to watch a horror film just to enjoy it, do you lose that? Somebody grab my hand, he's about to get chopped up, you know? Do you lose that?
Yeah, I'm my own worst critic. I hate watching my own movies because I'll be like, why did I do that? Why did the director let me do that? You know, things like that where I always wish I had done something differently. But what's really been fun lately, Slumber Party Massacre is celebrating its 40-year anniversary this year. So it's been playing at a lot of cinemas, and I've been doing talks, introducing it and doing Q&As afterward and stuff. And a lot of the kids in the audience were not even born when it was made 40 years ago, but they love the movie. And then you get the audience people who have seen it dozens of times, you know, quote unquote, that are really fans of it, and they still laugh and gasp, and you know, so it's really amazing that some of my movies became cult classics, and they endure and they still hold up. That's the amazing thing.
But the thing of it is, when you're doing a horror film, and you know, like I remember when I was a kid and I saw the movie The Blob, I could not sleep with my foot outside of the blanket for like 8 years because the blob was going to come and get me. And it was like I used to just get this whole reaction to horror films. But then once I did the one director, Evils of the Night,
Yes.
okay, and stuff like that, where I was actually in the scene with somebody who was getting chopped up. And then you realize it's like, okay, get the ketchup, right? Get the blood or whatever. And you're like, you know, they're using a spray bottle to spray it on them.
I've had it thrown on me from a bucket before.
Right. Oh, you had a bucket. Well, that's a little different because that in and of itself can cause a reaction and make you kind of cringe. But like when I saw it, was like, don't mess up the makeup and just put it down over here. And then you're like, oh, wow. So then you go back to watch horror films after that, like in the theater, and then the scene is coming, and then I noticed that I was desensitized. I couldn't like get really afraid.
Yeah, I still do. When I see movies that aren't my own, I can still get a suspended disbelief, you know, where I can watch them and still feel the tension and stuff like that.
No, it's nice. Know that it doesn't ruin for you, and you still get the effect of it.
Yeah, I like the horror comedies. I really prefer those, like the ones that we did in the 80s and 90s. I don't like a lot of gore, and it's so popular
Like,
now because
name one.
oh, like the Saw movies, what they call torture porn. I just find that very hard to
The
watch.
Saw movies, it's called torture porn?
Yeah.
They actually allowed those?
Well, they're very popular.
I never even heard of them before.
Yeah, that's not really my thing. I like suspense. I like movies like A Quiet Place, where it's a buildup of suspense.
Yeah, those are always the ones that gave me the creeps, though. The ones where I just felt like the creeper was coming, and then he wouldn't come, but he would just act like he was going to come.
Yeah.
So you would just be in a constant state of like, when is he going to get here?
Or some weirdo's calling you, and you find out he's in the house.
Yeah, that was like a very popular
I love
one.
that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So you wrote the screenplay for Teenage Exorcist, and then you co-wrote about 6 other movies.
Yeah.
You want to tell us about some of that?
I learned writing from Ted Newsom, who had done 100 years of horror about Hammer movies. And he had taken on a job for Marco Garibaldi, who was with Priscilla Presley at the time. And he had a concept for a movie called The Recruiter. So Ted had said, yes, I'll write the script for you. And then he got a better paying job and couldn't finish it. So he came to me, he knew me as an actress, and he said, hey, you want to write a screenplay? And I said, I have no idea how to write a screenplay. He said, it's really easy. I can teach you in 3 hours. So I wrote the screenplay. He kind of supervised it. And it was actually a really good script. And then RoboCop came out, and The Recruiter was almost exactly like RoboCop, which we had written our screenplay first, and then RoboCop came out. So we continued to work together.
So you had like a kind of a colliding interest.
Yeah.
Where it was competitive.
Yeah.
they're kind of the same.
Well, and yeah, I mean, the recruiter never came out because of RoboCop. It was just too similar.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, the first 10 minutes were identical. We have a helicopter come in, and it's two newscasters, a pretty girl and an older guy. And Ted and I are sitting in the theater watching this and going, oh, my God, this is our movie.
Oh, that's too bad.
Yeah, we couldn't believe it. I mean, it happens. But he and I went on to write other things. And then I did Teenage Exorcist because Fred Olin Ray had advertised it at the AFM and was trying to raise money to shoot it. And I asked him later, are we ever going to shoot that movie? Because he put my name on the flyer. And he said, I'll be honest with you, I don't even have a script yet. And I'm like, can I write it? So he says, yeah. So I wrote the script. He ended up selling it to Grant Waldman, who for some reason couldn't find an 18-year-old blonde girl to play the teenage exorcist.
Wow.
Not like they don't get off the bus every day in Hollywood.
Right.
So he ended up hiring Eddie Deason to play the teenage exorcist. So all through lunch, for example, I'm rewriting the script to fit Eddie.
Who's a guy.
Who's a guy, and he's probably in his 40s at this point.
Oh, no.
Lines like, oh, look at the time, Mom's expecting me home. I mean, it probably would have been funny to leave it with Eddie saying those lines, but I had to keep rewriting the whole script. At one point, I just broke down and cried. It was so stressful.
Well, at this point, you had such a name in the horror genre that by starting to do screenplays, and I'm sure that there was a lot of interest in your project.
Yeah, I recently did my first directing job, and the way that came about, a friend of mine, Joe Castro, who started out in special effects and then became a director and a producer, has been doing a series of anthology films called Terror Tunes, and I've been in Terror Tunes 2, 3, and 4. So he said, I'm putting together the next Terror Tunes, and I'm looking for scripts that are about 30 minutes long. He said, I'm welcoming everyone to submit a synopsis. So I submitted a synopsis, and he said, I really like it. Write me 1 page. So I wrote a page. He said, I really like this. Would you write me 30 pages? So I did, and then he called me and he said, we need to talk. And I'm like, oh, what did I do wrong? So I went over to his house, and he said, I like this so much that I want you to direct this so you can stay true to your vision. And I said, well, you realize that I'm in the whole movie. I wrote it for myself as an actress. And he said, that's fine. You can write, act, and direct at the same time. So I ended up doing it. We
The
shot
cook
it.
and the bottle washer, right?
Yeah, we shot it back in 2018. And on my first day of shooting, I hired Linnea Quigley and Debbie Rochon to work with me because I wanted to work with friends I'd never directed before. And the camera guy was so funny. He says, you're the least excitable director I've ever worked with. Usually they're screaming and running around and tearing out their hair and beating their chests. And he says, and you're just like, and action. So it was quite the compliment. And now I've got my first feature film that I'm going to be directing next month for Full Moon. It's a remake of Sorority Babes in the Slimeball Bolorama.
Wow.
And you starred in the original.
Congratulations.
I did. I starred in the original, and Charlie Band at Full Moon called me up one evening.
We had
and
him. I had him on my show. He was on a special Halloween show for me.
He's done
wonderful.
so many wonderful
So
films.
many.
So he called
So
me up,
many.
and he said, hey, we're going to remake or do a sequel to Sorority Babes. And I'm thinking, why are you telling me I died in the first movie? And he's like, I want to know if you want to direct it. And this was a time when the Me Too movement was really coming out, and they really wanted women to be more involved in positions of authority. So they were looking for female directors. So finally, it was totally derailed by COVID, and we're going to shoot it in 1 month. So I'm terrified, but also very excited.
And so you don't have any directing experience, right?
Just the short films.
Yeah, my brother was a director and qualified for great director, and he taught me everything I know about directing. And he said, in order to be great at what you do, you need to understand the making of the film, and then you will it will take your acting to another level, because once you understand what it takes to create that, it gives you like a completely different vision into the project, and it really did change things for me.
Yeah, I've been on enough sets, I mean over 200, that I've learned from experience.
And that is
And-
how we learn. You
Yeah.
you can go to acting, and I've done so much like acting workshop schools and all this other stuff after the fact. But when I originally got into acting, I was a model, and the same type of thing happened. And it was like you just get on the set, and when you're always playing the same role, basically, right?
Yeah,
Pretty much.
yeah.
Then you just kind of start to fit into that character. But after the fact, I all the acting that I was doing, they were like, "Wow, you're great. You're this, you're that." And I said, I learned all this from being on a set. You know, there's nothing like the experience of being on a set and learning how to just hit your mark, and then it just becomes like second.
Yeah, I really learned a lot, especially from the really good directors like Fred Olen Ray and Dave Dakota. And then I've done a lot of films where it's a first-time young director, and he's very unsure. And I get to help out in my own little way by saying, hey, don't forget you need a reverse angle on that shot. And he's like, oh, thank you, I would have forgotten that. So, and also I work with a lot of actors running lines and stuff, so I think I'd be good with actors. And mostly it's just a challenge to try to bring my own unique sensibility to Sorority Babes, because the first movie was so wonderful. It was really good, the acting, the characters that were in it. And I don't want people to say, why did they bother to remake this? I want people to say, wow, that was fun.
So do you see this as your future? Like your future is going to be in directing now, or
Yeah,
you're going to
possibly.
continue acting?
Well, I love acting, and I get a lot of acting roles still. But yeah, I think if I do a good job for Full Moon, they'll probably hire me for other
Well,
things.
he does a lot of projects.
Yeah.
Let's just face it. Charles Band, I mean, how many movies has he made? Probably about in the thousands.
Yeah, most recently I was in Trophy Heads, along with Linnea and Michelle and a number of other screen queens like Denise Duff, and that was just great. It was the funniest script. I was just laughing out loud constantly at the script.
I would love to see a Scream Queen revival where they take you and Linnea and the handful of you that were all of the same era, and then create a movie where, I don't know, where
Yeah.
you have like a flashback to the old day, and then here you are in today, and then do some kind of revival film. Wouldn't that
Yeah.
be?
I think that'd be awesome.
Especially now, because everything with like, they're bringing back all the greatest things about the 80s, which thank God for that, because the 80s, I love the 80s and 90s, but they have Kiss, they have Motley Crue, they have Aerosmith, all these people that are just coming back around, and they're resurrecting these careers because they never replaced us with better.
Yeah.
So
Right. Yeah. There has been sort of an 80s revival, I've noticed that, where I've gone to a lot of screenings of Sorority Babes also. And again, everybody laughs in the right place, and the movie still holds up. So, and then Linnea, Michelle, and I have been in more modern movies, like Cougar Cult and Three Scream Queens, and the three of us will also be in the new Sorority Babes movie. And they are going to show some clips from the past movie. So it's not exactly a remake, it's kind of a sequel. But
So Cougar Cult, that sticks out to me. Okay, so that immediately grabbed me. So give us a little tidbit on Cougar Cult. What's it about?
Well, it was made by Dave Dakota in this mansion.
Oh, who wouldn't you know?
Overlooking Malibu.
Shout out to Dave Dakota.
Hey, Dave.
We love him.
Yes, thank you for everything. And it was Michelle, Linnea, and I, and we play three sisters who live in this gorgeous mansion overlooking the ocean. And we hire these young boys, like the pool boy and the masseur and all that, and then we eat them.
Oh my God. And of course they think it's going to be like, a porn.
Yeah. Right, yes.
Right?
Sexy older women, and we look terrific. I mean, we had a great makeup and hair people and stuff, and we all look gorgeous. But, it's fatal for the young men, I'm afraid.
And then they get eaten. And who are the male talents?
Oh, they're replaceable boys.
Oh.
But the poster even says, "Cougars eat their cubs."
Oh, that is amazing. That would be really funny. Look at Joe's all embarrassed. He can't.
Wasn't that shot in Dave Dakota's house?
House? No. He had this mansion that he would rent. And it was absolutely gorgeous. It was just this most amazing, huge marble floors and fabulous mansion.
Now, one of the things that I know about horror genre and adult, you were talking, you touched on it earlier, is that because of the obscenity laws, don't you have to be careful when you are doing like a sexy scene or a nude scene and you're bringing out the knives or the weapons, right? Because there is like all these kind of lines that are drawn in that, correct?
Yeah, it's much different now, where they have these intimacy counselors that are on SAG sets whenever there's a love scene or nudity or something like that. And I've even thought about trying to apply for that because I have a degree in psychology.
Wow.
So I'm...
I haven't even run into that yet. Yeah.
It's mostly SAG movies, but that sounded interesting to me, to be an intimacy counselor, but I can't find anything online about how you become one.
What is an intimacy counselor? Like, we're going to tell you how to...
Yeah, if there's a love scene...
Now, if you guys need any advice on how to do it...
Well, they will...
advice, Amber?
Yeah.
I'm available. Just call the number on the bottom of the screen at 323-524-2599. We'll be happy to give you guys a little intimacy counseling.
Yeah.
That was funny.
The impression I get, the way it works, is like, let's say two people are in bed and supposed to be making love. And the intimacy counselor will like sit on the bed, on the side of the bed, and go, okay, now, do you have any place that you don't allow him to touch you? And she might say, well, I don't want him to touch my breast. And the woman will say, okay, no touching her breast. You can touch her butt, but not her breast.
That's so funny because we used to go through this in the adult movies, and they would just say, don't do this, don't do that, and don't do the other. And they'd say, okay. And we'd just get to it. This is just another way of wasting time and bringing it into a movie that you're only shooting in 24 or 48 hours anyway. But now they've got new ways. I guess they're just trying to give more people work, which, that's... And if it makes people feel safe, to be on the set. But again, back in the 80s and 90s, we didn't have these problems.
No, not at all. When I did Slumber Party Massacre, shooting it in 81, it said right in the drama log that there would be nudity. And then we met with Amy Jones, the director, a woman, and she said there will be nudity. And you had to agree to that because, like I said, college-age males, and nudity was just part of those films. So if you agreed to do it, you had to. And it was really no big deal. It wasn't like it was prurient. We just knew that the filmmakers knew they had to put it in there. So everybody was just really cool about it.
Well, you were known for doing nudity in most of your films, which made you like a cult, iconic horror.
Yeah.
Sex symbol.
Yeah, I was
sex symbol.
I was
exactly.
willing
Thank
to
you.
do shower scenes and stuff, and I actually had an agent, Roxanne, who would send me out for body doubling roles and things. Like I'm in Psycho 3, I body doubled Diana Scarwood, and different things. So
that's an exciting. I bet that's something that the fans want to know about.
Yeah. Well, I was sent over to Universal to Tony Perkins' office. He was the director and also the star. And I was told to wear a bikini. And so he said, do you mind to take your dress off? You're wearing a bathing suit, right? And I said, yes. So I slipped the dress off, and he said, now turn around. And I turned around, and he was so embarrassed. And he was like, okay, you're perfect. He said we were looking for somebody that had pale skin, about 5'3", and no tattoos. So
I thought you were going to say no.
I was like,
oh.
they had to do a reshoot of one of the scenes, and Diana Scarwood couldn't come back. She was in New York doing a play, and she would have done it, but she couldn't make it out. So they hired a body double to do it, and it's where she is undressing, and she walks down a hallway. You see the back of me. And she gets into the bathtub and then ends up cutting her wrists. So that was me doing all that.
Oh, I think I remember that.
And yeah, it's just a little thing, but and I was also in the movie Body Double doing various parts. So, it helped to do nudity in those days because, for one thing, it got me noticed for my fan base, but it also
Boy,
paid.
does it ever get you noticed if you do nudity, but it just takes you to another level, especially when you're in a scream queen or in the horror film genre, because people don't expect that. Mm-hmm. So it gives you that whole nother sex symbol thing, and you didn't have to do too much in the 80s.
No, and it paid really well too.
And then
You know,
how did you like Playboy TV?
I did a lot for Playboy Cable, and boy, did that pay well. I mean,
Right.
that was
I remember
amazing. It was like
that.
three or four times a movie job, salary. But I never liked any kind of simulated sex, so I did a lot of scenes with girls to where it wasn't sexual. It was just naked girls writhing around on a bed.
It was so boring to me when we used to do that whole Playboy thing where they would make you writhe around and writhe around and writhe around and writhe around. And you would be like, and I would be like, can we just do something here? Because this is just until your eyeballs would roll around like a Joe. Look, we're embarrassing poor Joe. Get a close up on Joe's face right now. It is so red. It's almost purple. It's almost purple.
I've even got the red hat on.
Oh, he's got the red hat on. His face is redder than his hat. That's awesome. He should be used to it with me. So, how do your fans follow you and your new projects? Let's talk about that.
Well, I'm on Facebook. I have my own Facebook page, Brink Stevens. And then I can't accept any more friends. Facebook tells me I have enough friends already. So
Oh.
I have a public page also called Brink Stevens. There's the Brink Stevens Appreciation Society and another community group called Brink Stevens, which anyone can join. And I monitor those. I reply, and if people ask questions or make comments, I'm very much into that. I also have a website, brink.com.
Which is where you really want to go. If you
Yeah,
want
I-
and you have merch on it and stuff like that.
Yeah, I lost my online store. I have to replace it, but I've been too busy to actually take care of it. But it does list all my appearances, where I'm going to be. And I was just, this has been,
Do you have a fan club where if your fans want to get something signed by you or something like that, or do you post anything on, I don't know if we
no.
can promote that.
Yeah, I
like
used
eBay's
to.
or whatever.
Before the internet, in the 80s and 90s, I would mail out a newsletter, and I would hire people to help me fold it and lick the envelopes. I would send out like 5,000 or 10,000 of them.
Right?
And it
I
would-
did too. I
yeah.
loved the old school fan club. Yeah. And they would pay the monthly fee and you'd communicate with people. And it was all done in letters.
Yes, yes.
And then the internet changed everything.
Yeah, what amazes me is
Internet changed the world.
It's evil.
Right? And we need to change it back.
Well-
It took out the personalized aspect
Yeah.
of your fans. you
people
know.
saved my letters. Every once in a while it shows up on Facebook. Somebody will have a snapshot of a letter that I sent them. and they saved them.
handwritten
Yeah.
letters. Oh, I
Little
would
notes.
cherish one of those. I'm gonna have to join her fan club so she can write me up. No, really, that is just
Now-
above and beyond.
Now the fan club is just Facebook. That's
Now it's just Facebook
Yeah,
now, and
yeah.
you have your website still.
yeah. I'm everywhere on Facebook, so I always post everything I'm doing. Like I was in Chicago recently. Florida, I did a convention and a movie shoot. I was in Texas. I did the chain of comic book stores. Just a lot of. I'm co-producing a movie called Howl in upstate New York.
And you also have an upcoming appearance at one of my favorite places, one of my favorite conventions that is on the East Coast, right?
Oh, Chiller Theater, yes. Yes, hopefully in April of next year, it'll be me, Linnea Quigley, and Michelle Bauer, and it'll be the Nightmare Sisters reunion.
That is going to be fun, and people should go check that out. I know Chiller can be just a mob scene, but if you guys are all there at the same time, that would be really fun. I've been there a
Yeah.
couple times. I've done a couple of them.
It's so great that finally we're able to do conventions again after 2 or 3 years of everything being canceled.
Oh, everything canceled and the lockdown and all of that. It's just way just time for us to all get back out there and just have some fun and get some new projects. Right, Joe?
I agree 110%.
Is there anything that you wanted to mention? Because I know you had some.
Okay, I was going to ask you, so how many times have you been killed in your movies so far?
I haven't kept an accurate quote, but back when I had done about 100 movies, I did an inventory, and I had killed people in 38 movies, and I had been killed in 58 movies. So it's almost even.
So please stop killing Brink Stevens.
Well,
right, guys?
that was the benefit of Fred Olin Ray working with me so much, where I was always a victim. And then he realized that there was better things to do with me than kill me. And I love the kind of roles where I would start out fairly normal, like a good girl, and then I would become possessed by a demon or bitten by a vampire or something like that, or going completely insane, like in Haunting Fear. And I finished the movie as the villain. So it's always fun to play the good girl and the villain both in the same movie.
God, I've had so much fun. I'm so appreciative. Thank you so much. We are honored to have you on our show, Brink, and we definitely, when you get the film done, we want to have you back again because we want to know, we want to follow you, and we want to know how the film turns out. Guess what, guys? I don't know where the time goes when you're having fun. That is all the time we have for tonight's show. A very special thanks to our guest, Brink Stevens, for joining us tonight. Give her a hand, everybody. My co-host, Joe Williamson, and all our studio crew who worked very hard behind the scenes, and most of all, our fans for tuning in weekly to our broadcast. And special thanks to our sponsors. And if you would like to become an official RNSU sponsor, and you would like to advertise on our blog or advertise on our radio show, we would love to have you. Contact us at amberlynnmedia@gmail.com and give us a follow on all our social media links at Twitter, at Rock-N-Sexxxy, and also right here at the bottom of your screen, amberlynn.rnsu. Can't wait to see you guys again next week with another amazing episode. Have a wonderful week.
Thank you for tuning in to Amber Lynn's Rock-N-Sexxxy Uncensored, available on rockandSexxxyUncensored.com. Don't forget to hit us up on all your favorite social media links, and tune in next week for another amazing episode of Rock-N-Sexxxy Uncensored.